Welcome to the Chronological Christie podcast, in which a longtime Agatha Christie collector and her Christie novice husband discuss the works of the Queen of Crime in publication order. In this episode, we take a look at the remaining 4 stories in the Poirot Investigates short story collection: The Case of the Missing Will, The Veiled Lady, The Lost Mine, and The Chocolate Box.
Welcome to the Chronological Christie podcast. We are your hosts.
Gillian Porter, a longtime Agatha Christie reader and collector.
And her husband, Alan Porter, who after almost 40 years of sharing a house with Agatha Christie books, has decided he should read them.
We'll be tackling the books in UK publication order as detailed on the official Agatha Christie website, and sharing our thoughts on each from the viewpoint of someone familiar with them
and someone reading them for the first time.
In this episode, we will be taking a look at the remaining 4 stories in the Poirot Investigates short story collection published in the UK in 1924. However, the edition we have in our library is the US version that was first published in 1925 and features 3 additional stories that weren't published in the UK until 1974. We will be using the US edition as the basis for our discussions. As the US collection includes a total of 14 stories, we have split the discussion over 3 episodes. We discussed the first 10 stories over our last 2 episodes, and in this episode, we will cover the remaining 4 stories in the collection.
At this point in the podcast, we would normally talk about what was going on in the world and with Agatha during the year of publication. However, as this is the second book published in the UK in 1924, we've already covered those in episode 5 on The Man in the Brown Suit. On this podcast, we are talking about plots and stories that range from 50 to just over 100 years old, and in several cases that have been adapted for TV and or movies. But as the podcast demonstrates, people are coming new to the works of Agatha Christie at any time and may not be familiar with all the details of the stories under discussion. So this is a spoiler warning that we will be diving into plot and character details, as well as talking about who done it and why. So if you aren't familiar with the stories under discussion, you might want to pause the podcast here, then find a copy of the book, give it a read before returning for the discussion. Or you can just keep listening, whether you know the story or not. It's your choice. As we will be covering multiple stories in this episode, we're continuing the format that we had for the last 2 episodes, where we'll be tackling each story as follows: title, synopsis, story discussion, and adaptations. And with that said, let's dive into the last 4 stories from Poirot Investigates.
Exciting, right? The Case of the Missing Will. Violet Marsh engages Poirot to help her find a missing will from her uncle. Okay, I'm up first discussing this one. That first passage of Hastings disapproving of the modern girl made me wonder who in Agatha Christie's world had stated that opinion. Somebody must have. But to be honest, not much has changed on men disapproving of women who go their own way, which is kind of sad. I thought it was a clever story. This is where we are going to have issues. I agree with Poirot that she was using her ingenuity in employing Poirot as she accepted her own limitations in beating her uncle. I enjoyed reading it as I had forgotten where the second will was, so I followed the disappointment when it wasn't in the hiding place behind the bricks. Also would love to know, wasn't in the story, but they dashed off that train, left their valises and their hats. Did they ever get those back? Made me curious. So what did you think, Alan?
I hadn't picked up on the fact that their stuff was still on the train. Good catch. Yeah. Very good question. I wonder if they did go back. My first reaction in reading this was I actually disagree with Jill, but agree with Hastings. I think Miss Violet Marsh cheated by employing Poirot to find her uncle's missing will. Despite what Poirot said at the end, I don't think she is using her wits. And yes, it stuck to the letter of the bet or the challenge that her uncle could outthink her even after death and she wouldn't find the new will. But I don't know. Like I said, it may have stuck to the letter of the bet, but I don't think it abided by the spirit of it. I think we'll agree to disagree on that one. And to be honest, I was actually surprised that Poirot even took the case. I know it was an interesting mental challenge, but it certainly didn't fit with my idea of what his moral compass would be and what he would take on. So I guess this is our first major disagreement in 8 episodes. So
Yeah,
that's not bad going. I did like the mental challenge of it. I didn't exactly figure out where the will was, but I knew that the key with the bigger tab on it was significant. With the mismatched handwriting on the tab was a significant clue. Still couldn't quite visualize how the will was actually there unless it was a really big key fob or the will was smudged up really tiny. But the actual physics of it aside, I thought it was clever. Yeah, I thought it was really well done. I liked it, and it's interesting that you and I took a very different moral approach to whether she was cheating or not on this one. So that's made for some fun discussions since we first read this one.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. But, the moral ambiguity of it is the kind of what makes it an interesting story. Should he have taken the case, like you said? That is kind of interesting. I assumed because when he did it, he opened out that envelope and then heated it to see the will. And as he left her everything, it probably didn't need to be a very long will in the first place.
No, it probably didn't. It was probably like a paragraph or something, but yeah.
Yeah. But, like you said, is it a big envelope? Is it a letter envelope? Is it,
yeah.
How big was it? It does make you curious. I agree.
So what did you think of the adaptation for this one?
This was season 5, episode 4 of Agatha Christie's Poirot. Where was the similarity to the short story? The only thing that was similar was the names. Obviously not one of the ones I rewatch very often. As an episode, it wasn't bad. It wasn't, wasn't the best, wasn't one of the worst, but comparing it to the short story, it didn't really compare much at all. And I know they didn't have much to go on to make it into the right length of time. To change it so completely, I'd like to know that process. I'd like to know when they sat down, was it just the script writer, did he just write it and they make changes, or did they have a discussion about how different it was going to be? Because it is very different. And I liked the episode in itself. Comparing it to the short story annoyed me, but I did like the episode in itself, apart from the fact that they had to turn it into a murder. Poirot being Andrew's friend was very convenient. And I did feel, it's weird. I did enjoy it. I thought it was a clever way. It showed how different it was for women and men going to college, that women could go to college, but they weren't allowed to graduate. I liked that it showed all that kind of thing. But solving the murder rather than finding a will, why did they carry on calling it the missing will? But really what drove me nuts was the continuity errors. We had Poirot at the hospital asking Miss Lamont to research the name of Miss Campion's baby. She gets out of Hastings' car at the right offices in a red dress. And while she's looking at the record, she's in the blue dress from the hospital and then is back in the red dress. Does that mean it took place over several days? Which I'm kind of hoping it did, because she's gone from the hospital after Miss Campion has concussion and breaks her leg in 2 places after being pushed down one of those massive London Underground escalators. But if you follow the continuity of it only being a day, later that same day, or even later that same week, if she was that badly off, the graduation of her students, and she manages to stand while she hands out, I know she had a cane, but she manages to stand while she hands out the graduation certificates. And that all kind of threw me out the story. Was it time passing? Is that what the different clothing of Miss Lemoyne meant to show you? But knowing back in the day what happened when you had concussion and broke your leg, Miss Campion wouldn't have been out of hospital for weeks. So that threw me out the story. And the murderer is kind of contrived because she's really only very much a background character till the end. You don't really understand why she does what she does until she says so. With all the mystery of, was Andrew the father of either of the 2 boys, or why they had to be in it, or was he Violet's father? All that was just, I don't know. It's funny. I enjoyed watching it, while at the same time my brain was thinking, this is a train wreck. So marrying those 2 things together is kind of difficult. But what did you think, Helen?
I haven't really got anything else to add. I think what I wrote in my show notes, which was ditto.
Oh,
Yeah,
no, come on. You've got one thing to add.
right, Miss Campion's four. She seemed to be in and out of that wheelchair on a regular basis too for continuity. The continuity bloops, and I think it was continuity bloops, didn't really fit with the timeline that was established in the story itself. That was very off-putting. And like you said, I enjoyed it while we were watching it, other than when we saw those annoying continuity bloops. But it was a very different story. This felt like it was almost a completely original story, so why give it a title as if it's an adaptation when it's not really, other than the name of a couple of characters and the name of the story. And the missing will was burnt, wasn't it, if I remember rightly? So he's never going to find it. So as an adaptation, it was very strange. As an original story, it was quite entertaining, but it had a lot of production errors. So yeah, as you said, not quite sure how to sort of think about it. It was good and it was bad. It was bad and it was good.
Yeah, and she was going to inherit because she was his daughter. So they didn't actually need the will in the first place. So why did the will matter anyway? Some interesting decisions made there, I will say.
I think on that definitive note, let's move on to the second story.
The Veiled Lady. A lady requests Poirot's help in retrieving a letter. What did you think of this short story, Alan?
I enjoyed the short story. I actually didn't figure out the full picture of exactly what was going on until the reveal at the end, so that's always nice. And of course, once you know that, you realize all the necessary clues were there anyway. Should know by now, everything counts. Sort of realization made me go back and rethink the story and go, oh yeah, the newspaper report of the dead guy in Holland was significant. Even at the time, it just seemed a throwaway line and things like that. So I enjoyed that. I liked the fact that Agatha Christie here was playing with Hastings' snobbery, in that if somebody walks in seemingly well dressed and says they're a member of the gentry that he'd read about in the newspaper, he's just going to accept that as that's who they are and treat them accordingly. So I sort of liked that. I did enjoy the double twist at the end, that basically finding the so-called blackmail material was just a hook by the crooks to get Poirot to discover where the stolen gems that they'd been double-crossed about were hidden. I thought that was very clever. And I did like Jap basically hiding in Poirot's apartment at the end and stepping out at the moment of the reveal to arrest Lady Millicent and declare her to actually be a thief that he knew by the name of Gertie, which I thought was really fun. So yeah, I enjoyed this one. It had a lot of things, really good things going for it. The double twist I liked. And like I say, I liked the way she was playing with probably not just Hastings' snobbery, but, that class thing of that period. If somebody said they were, high class, they would be treated accordingly. And like I said, the fact I didn't figure it out until the end was a real positive. A good one. I like this one. Yeah,
and I think also the fact that they could choose somebody like Lady Millicent, who mostly lived in the country, didn't really have had her pictures in the paper, so nobody was going to really know what she looked like. I thought that was clever on the thief's part to be using that. And I had forgotten how this one ended, so I enjoyed trying to work this one out. It seems like a very straightforward story, and if you pay attention, it's not, because all the clues are there to solve the puzzle. Like you said, Agatha Christie isn't one to add too many unnecessary details, just enough to keep it interesting, just to keep you guessing of, oh, is this a clue or is this a red herring? So that's kind of interesting as well. And the whole idea of the case for Poirot hinging on shoes is very clever. He sees the shoes, Hastings sees the shoes, but they come to two very different conclusions because Hastings doesn't really see the shoes. She's told him she's Lady Millicent, like you said, and he just accepts that, whereas Poirot didn't. And I thought that was a very clever way of doing it. So the adaptation was season 2, episode 2. We're all over the place again on these for Agatha Christie's Poirot. What did you think of the adaptation, Alan?
This was a strange one. I had problems with the start. The main body of it I really enjoyed, and then the ending just got ridiculously silly. So let's get back to the beginning, my thoughts on the beginning. So it starts off with a snatch and grab thief, which he does in the story. In the story, he breaks a window and grabs some stones out of the window. That works. Here, he grabbed, he was in the store and he grabbed some very complex looking necklaces with big settings and multiple stones and stuff. Yet somehow we're meant to have believed that in the 30 seconds it took him to run down the arcade from the store, he managed to take the stones out and pass them to an accomplice who then gave him paste versions of the stones. And again, we've got this mysterious person. I'd love to know who this mysterious person is who seems to have built a whole profession about making paste stones to fit in Agatha Christie mysteries without actually seeing the original gems.
Yeah, but what you're not mentioning there is that the ones in the store were all diamonds.
Yes.
There were no colored stones, yet the jewels they had at the end, there were sapphires and...
Yeah. So how all that works, that just seemed ridiculous. The main part of the episode, though, where they've actually followed the source material pretty faithfully, I thought was delightful. And I actually even enjoyed the additional part of Poirot being outfoxed by the housekeeper when he broke in the blackmailer's house to set it up so he could get back later that night, when he was pretending to be fitting burglar alarms and he was actually rigging the windows so he and Hastings could get back the light. And then she told him she went home at 6 o'clock, but she didn't. She actually slept in the house. So when he came back later that night, because she'd been suspicious, she actually managed to call the police on him and get him arrested and locked up. I thought that was really good. I like the fact he got outfoxed by the housekeeper and him being arrested and having to be bailed out by Jap. And again, the comedy, the interactions between them of him getting Poirot out of jail, I thought was really funny. So that was all logical, very well handled, added a bit more drama and comedy to the story. I thought that was great. But then we get the ending once Millicent is actually revealed as the jewel thief Gertie. And it goes over the top with the common accents. We get the old gore blimey governor stuff, which drives me nuts. So that the over-the-top accents, which for a British TV show just was like, really? They're going there? And then we had that silly game of hide and seek around the museum, instead of it just being a straight arrest like it was in the story. Weird, overly complex, illogical beginning, really good middle with the main story, and then it just got silly at the end. So, God blimey, Gavner, I was mixed up about this one, I was. So what about you?
I was going to say as well that it's some of these, the way they end up with these chases is mystifying, because I see the stories as being simple, easy stories, but obviously they have to fill the time. Like you, I enjoyed the part where they go to the house, and that I love the fact that Hastings leaps through the window, breaks all the windows and runs away. And when Poirot gets released from prison, he goes back and he's complaining. And Hastings like, well, if I hadn't run away, I wouldn't have been able to call Jap. You'd still be there. I loved that interaction, like you said. Those interactions between the base four is really what makes these shows. I was thinking initially, I didn't have much to add with this, as I agree with your summary. The actress playing Lady Millicent was way too old and sophisticated to be a worried young woman coming to Poirot for help because she was worried about what her fiance would say about this letter. Young women who live in the country don't stay in fancy hotels and wear satin suits during the day. There's a certain kind of person that does. They're more sophisticated. She'd probably been wearing a simple tweed suit. So I don't understand why they went with that. And like we discussed when we were watching it, the veil she was wearing, you could see through it. You could see her face. So why was she wearing it? Get the impression from the short story that the veil would be much thicker, so you really couldn't see her face. But it was just one of those little veils that women wore across their hats to keep the bugs off when they were in a car, more than a veil to stop people being able to see who she was. They also lost the whole thing about the shabby shoes, which was the pivotal point of when Poirot knew that she wasn't who she said she was. They lost that whole point. There's another story where they lose that pivotal point of the story. But I also enjoyed, like they've done it several times, where the actual conversations the actors have in the adaptation come pulled straight from the short story. And I really enjoy that. And I would also like to know, has anybody ever counted how many different ways Hugh Fraser says, I say? Because it means so many different things when he says it. That absolutely fascinates me. I think he's very clever in the way he managed to inhabit the character of Hastings and do all those different ways of saying, I say, and make it mean so many different things. Maybe I had a lot more to say than I originally thought. The Lost Mine. Poirot reminisces about a case where he was gifted shares to a mine after successfully solving the case. This one for me was one of those, when I read it, it was okay, but I didn't really remember much about it. yeah, I just didn't really remember much about it. What did you think, Alan?
Yeah, cool, blimey, Gavin. I didn't like this one. I'll stop doing that. No, I didn't like this one. The setup of Poirot talking about finances and stock and asking Hastings if he wanted to hear a story about his past case just seemed to come out of nowhere. So far, I've never heard him talk, other than like the one short story where it was the Grand Hotel one, where there was the mention of him getting paid by check at the end, and he sort of pushed that away. He doesn't seem the sort of character who's obsessed by money like he seemed to be in this story. Him talking about finances and stuff just seemed out of character. Again, it was another tale involving Chinese characters that seems full of racial stereotyping and almost cartoonish accents with the way it was written. It made me feel a bit, I know I'm looking at it from a modern sensibility, but I actually felt a bit uncomfortable reading it. And as for the central mystery, to be honest, I didn't find it engaging, interesting, and I didn't really care. Which sort of brings us to the adaptations. So we are still in season 2 here with season 2, episode 3 of Agatha Christie's Poirot. And this felt very padded, with the addition of Poirot's bank balance issues, which again seemed a complete reversal of what was said in the short story. The whole point of the short story was that he always had that £44, 4 shillings and 4pence in the bank. I mean, that was his balance. He always kept his balance that way. And for him to be in this one being increasingly overdrawn because he's forgotten to cash a check, I don't know, it just didn't seem to fit with his character. I imagine Miss Lemon would be on top of things like that. I don't know. It just seemed wrong. So I didn't like that.
I agree. It felt very, very wrong.
The whole thing with Jack playing around with the radio-equipped police cars and the monitor board, which looked like it was something out of World War II, Battle of Britain movie with the girls moving the things, seemed very anachronistic to me. And I thought it borrowed way too heavily from World War II stuff. After I originally wrote up this note, he went back and looked things up. So the UK police first started to test radio on patrol cars in 1931, but not in London, in Nottingham. And they published the results in 1934. So if this is set in 36, feasibly they could be in patrol cars in London. But the interesting thing is, what I read was that they actually transmitted their messages by Morse code rather than voice. They actually didn't use voice messages in patrol cars for quite a time longer, because they could actually get a much clearer signal with a Morse. They had less chance of being intercepted and misunderstood. So that was interesting. I didn't realize that when they first started using radios in police cars, they were actually still transmitting messages by Morse. The patrol guys had to be trained in Morse code, which was interesting.
That is very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm going way off topic there.
It is kind of applicable. They used it in the story. That's what we do. We're both researchers. We like to check out things. So
tracking system they were showing, which they clearly borrowed from the Royal Air Force stuff, rollout of radar, they didn't start doing that in the Royal Air Force until 1938. So again, a little bit ahead of its time, very much sort of playing to the familiarity of World War II movies. I think it was a bit tongue-in-cheek, but it just didn't play well with me. I did, however, enjoy the through line of the Monopoly game between Poirot and Hastings, which seemed to go on for at least 3 days, if not longer. And I like Poirot's use of the rule book and the booklet as a way to get the guilty party to reveal an incriminating clue, that he actually swapped the documents and used the Monopoly book to make the guy think it was something else. So I liked that. But like the source material, to be honest, I wasn't actually bothered about the actual mystery. It didn't really capture me. I had more fun doing the research about radios in London patrol cars than I did actually watching the show. What about you?
Same. It was rather messy. Again, it was made for me by the interactions between the 4 main characters, especially that Monopoly game over several days. I mean, you play Monopoly over several days. That's a serious game. The coordinating cars to catch a suspect could have been so very cool, but it was definitely a filler. So that was a bit of a shame. The one thing I will say is I was dreading watching this because I had memories of the way the Chinese people that play a part in the short story were depicted in this. But actually, I didn't think that was too bad. I thought they were it wasn't too egregious. I was relieved and happy about that.
Yeah, I thought it was actually pretty sensitively done. It made sense within the context of the story and within the context of the part of London they were in. It wasn't overemphasized. The Asian people were playing the roles, playing Asian characters, doing Asian character things. I think that maybe the Ladies of the Night was a bit over the top stereotypical, but the rest of it I think was okay. I didn't necessarily have a problem with it. And like you, I was a bit concerned having read the original story. the ones we've come across so far, I think it was a more sensitive adaptation from that point of view.
Agreed. On to the last story from this book, The Chocolate Box. Poirot tells Hastings about the one case where he failed to solve the case. What did you think about this one, Alan?
I thought this was a fascinating way to finish the collection. It was an interesting look into Poirot's early career and his first steps as a private investigator. Given his later self-certainty that he's always right, him opening up to Hastings here about his early mistakes, I think showed how much trust there was between the two of them. The case itself was interesting, and it was clearly Agatha Christie showing off her knowledge of poisons. Unsurprising. But the fact of who done it and Poirot's reaction to it showed, I think, his humanity. And the fact that he would take this failure and it became really the foundation of his methodology going forward, I thought was very interesting. So for me, yeah, it was a foundational piece really in the development of his character. And I really enjoyed it from that point of view. But I do have one question. At the beginning, Poirot says, if I ever get ahead of myself or I'm getting too full of myself or whatever, just say the phrase chocolate box to pull me back. Did Hastings ever use that code word in another story, as far as you know?
Not to my memory, no, because Hastings isn't in a lot more of the
Oh, that's true. He's not in that many
Poirot
stories.
No, he's not. I wonder how off-putting that is for some people who come in and they are going to the books after watching Agatha Christie's Poirot, and they're like, well, where's Hastings? Where's Miss Lamont? Why isn't Jap in it more often? You know, that must be quite unsettling if you come to the books from the TV side.
I'll let you know when we get there.
Okay, can I talk now?
Yep, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I agree. I thought it was very interesting. I do find it odd that this wasn't published in the UK until 1974, along with the two others, as it is a formative story of his character, his career as he was still a policeman in the Belgian police force at this point. So it was formative. It was his first, if you like, private investigation. Technically he failed, but it also, the killer did confess to him and he chose to walk away without taking it to prosecution because he felt they had suffered enough. And that shows his moral compass, I think, in this. The one thing I did wonder about it all was how a lady who was almost blind managed to add over 20 tiny tablets to a chocolate without the murder victim noticing. As it was intimated, these were soft-centered chocolates. Wouldn't the 21 tablets be crunchy? Wouldn't that give him a clue? Is the chocolate that was in the chocolate enough to take over? Everybody had said these tablets tasted nasty. Was there enough chocolate in that chocolate to overcome that? But my main thing is, why didn't he notice when he ate it that it was full of 20 to 21 tablets? Can't remember the exact number. Because it would have been crunchy, not soft. That is my main question on that one. And I do also wonder how many members of any police force would really give up vacation time for a case for a pretty face. So there's that thought too. This adaptation was season 5, episode 6 of Agatha Christie's Poirot. I like this adaptation. I think it tells a good story while giving Poirot a better reason to tell the history of his first case that was a failure. I love the fact that it was about Jap being given an award by the Belgian police force for his work. Intimates that Jap had done other cases, not that his only interaction with crime was with Poirot. I enjoyed that part. Again, the two of them together, they are great, and I enjoyed that. I can forgive the few things that you're going to talk about, as I think it tells the past well. I also think I'm glad they made the poison liquid, as that made much more sense to replace a soft center than a lot of little tablets. Still have the same issue of this delicate work being done by a woman with poor eyesight. And I must admit in this, I'm really not sure how many of my old friends I would instantly recognize 20 years on. I wouldn't say I have face blindness, but I don't know that I would automatically recognize people I'd known from that time without context. How about you? Do you think you would?
Close friends. I mean, we've sort of done that when we've been back in the UK and seen friends we haven't seen for 30, 40 years, and we just pick up straight away. But we know we're meeting them, so you're sort of looking for them, even though it's slightly out of a different context. Like, college friends, we're not seeing them at college anymore. We're seeing them where they live now, but we're sort of looking for them, so you're sort of half looking. But yeah, I mean, I think that first one that he meets his old colleague, they literally just pass on the steps, don't they, or something?
Yeah.
In the hotel lobby, and yeah, I think I'd probably do a double take and go, "Oh, is that so and so?" But I don't think it would be that instant, "Whoa, hello," that there was in the show, But then again, he's a trained observer, so really good memory, with a really good memory. So he says he never forgets anything. So I didn't have a problem with that, I must admit.
Fair enough.
I did have some other problems though.
Oh, tell me. Let's get to the juicy stuff.
Well, I don't know if it's that juicy. I really enjoyed this one. That was a terrible lead-in, but I actually did really enjoy this one. It used the source material, I think, as the springboard to give Poirot a really interesting, character-driven backstory. It was fairly faithful to the original story, and I think the few changes they made actually made sense for it in a TV series setting. Like you say, with it, instead of it just being Poirot and Hastings talking in the apartment, it was actually Poirot and Japp going back to Brussels for Japp's investiture, and while he was there, catching up with some of Poirot's old friends, hearing about him as a detective, revisiting some of the places around the case and stuff, made a lot more sense, I think, in terms of telling that backstory. So I thought that was good. But it did sort of miss the whole point of Poirot's failure, that he didn't see an obvious clue. And that's what taught him going forward, that he had to observe all the details of the surroundings and things. So I think in the translation, it lost that point. And as you said, that seems to be something that happens a little too often, I think, in the adaptations, that they miss the central point of the story. And we've talked about that with a couple of the other short story adaptations. I know I asked you at the time, but the unrequited love angle and the lapel pin token that he's worn all the way through the series was explained as being from this lady that he took up the case for and was clearly besotted by, but was never actually declared his love, and she didn't declare for her, and she went off and married one of his friends and stuff. I assume that was all set up for the TV show. There's nothing in the books about him wearing a lapel pin from an unrequited love and stuff. That was just for the TV show, I get.
Just for the TV show, yeah. I don't remember any things like that. Okay,
but my big pet peeve goes back to the Murder on the Links, which was in France, and Poirot was the only person with an accent. Everybody else was English. Same here, but it's even worse because we're in Poirot's country. We're in Belgium, and he's the only person speaking with a Belgian accent, or any sort of accent. Everybody else is speaking perfectly accented English. What the hell? We're in Brussels. So in English here, everybody would have a slightly French, Belgian, Flemish accent. I know Flemish and French are different languages, but everybody would have an accent. If everybody's going to speak with an English accent, have Poirot speak with an English accent. But you can't do that because it's Poirot and the accent's part of the character. So why doesn't anybody else have a slight accent? It doesn't have to be heavy, but I don't know. It just annoyed the hell out of me.
Oh, me too.
So do not understand it. If somebody would care to explain the logic of that to me at some time, other than to make it easier to understand for an English audience, which is probably the only logic behind it.
Well, that doesn't make sense because everybody can understand Poirot.
Yeah, I know, but it's part of his the accent's part of his character as much as the moustaches, I guess. So I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, the only one who shouldn't have sounded Belgian was Japp.
So amazingly, that brings us to the end of the 14 stories in Poirot Investigates. And it's taken us 3 episodes to do 14 stories. And I understood she's written 150 short stories. So we've got a lot of big, long episodes to come, I guess. Which brings us to the favourite quote section. And you might notice it's not Jill. It's me. I'm hijacking the quote section this time around. I've been reading a book written by Andrew Pettigrew. It's a fascinating book called The Book at War, which is about what the title is. It's about the history of books and reading during wartime. Fascinating book. But I came across this quote from John Godfrey, who was the head of British Naval Intelligence in 1941. And this is the quote. Intelligence is only rarely dramatic. Its true basis is research, and the best results are usually obtained from the continuous study of insignificant details, which, though singly of little value, are collectively of great importance. And I read this and I thought, wow, does that remind me of somebody or what? And it made me wonder if Admiral Godfrey had read just a few Poirot mysteries along the way before he said that in 1941. What do you think, Jill?
Certainly sounds like it. And we'll make sure the link for that book is in the show notes in case anybody wants to take a look at it.
I'm just going to throw in another little tidbit here. Of course, Admiral Godfrey's second in command was a certain Ian Fleming, creator of James Bond. And I know there's a Christie James Bond thing coming up at some point, but maybe there's a little bit of Christie in Bond's backstory too. So thanks for joining us for this episode of the Chronological Christie podcast. If you would like to leave a rating or a review on your favourite podcast platform, that would be great. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. If you'd like to discuss any aspect of this episode, you can message us on the Chronological Christie Instagram account, a link for which will be in the show notes. Or you can find us on social media. Where can folks reach out to you, Jill?
I can be found on the Chronological Christie Instagram account. And in a bit of exciting news, my debut novel, Trust Issues, has just been published under my pen name, Gilly Kent, and is available at all good online retailers as an ebook or paperback.
And I'm very proud of you and looking forward to seeing the reviews we're going to get for your awesome novel. I can be found on most social platforms by searching for @AlanJPorter or via my author's website at alanjporter.com. And if you want to keep up with my various writing projects, you can sign up for my free weekly newsletter at alanjporter.substack.com.
The books discussed on this podcast can be found on a dedicated Chronological Christie section of our online bookstore at bookshop.org. The link will also be in the show notes. Please join us for our next episode where we will be discussing The Secret of Chimneys. We look forward to you joining us.
The music used in this episode was extracted from I'm Somebody, Somebody Now by the Joe Venuti Orchestra and is a public domain recording. The Chronological Christie podcast is a production of Megrin Entertainment, a division of 4J's Group, LLC.